Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Films and Stuff podcast. I am Ethan, joined by Pete. Hey, Pete, what's up?
Not much, buddy. How are you?
Without further ado, let's get into it. Today, we are going to review DC's The Flash, which just came out 2 days ago, right?
That's right.
Pete saw it on...
I saw it on Thursday.
And I saw it Saturday morning, actually. But we're still in the weekend, so we're still at the beginning. First of all, let's say that there are going to be spoilers on this episode. So if you have not seen The Flash, if you do not want to be spoiled, you better tuck this episode away until after you see it.
Run, Barry, run.
But if you have seen it, or you don't mind spoilers and you want a good review, you're in the right place. First things first, very rarely have, Pete, you and I ever had wildly different opinions about a movie or a television series, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're usually a couple degrees apart at most.
At most. We're usually on the same page.
Oh, yeah. But I think we're not even reading the same book at this one.
Which is really surprising because I was really looking forward to The Flash, and I thought you were as well, right? I think we both thought that the trailer looked fantastic.
The hype was off the charts.
The last two kind of superhero movies we saw were Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and Ant-Man Wasp Quantumanium, right?
And Spider-Man Miles Morales.
Spider-Man Miles Morales, and then we can also add Transformers. Of all of those, I was super excited for Ant-Man Wasp and dramatically let down. I was moderately excited for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and pretty much about it. And then having seen the trailers for The Flash, I was like really, really looking forward to this.
I fell victim.
You got on the hype train.
You
bought a first-class ticket.
And if it isn't clear already, Ethan found this movie to be far more enjoyable than I did.
I loved it. I loved this movie.
And I thought it was fine.
Yeah.
And the difference is that I was the first passenger on the Films and Stuff hype train for The Flash.
Capacity 2, yeah.
Because, they did an early review, early screening. Everyone was going absolutely apeshit for it. And I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And I'm really annoyed with myself for it.
Really?
Yeah.
So let's start with the build up to this. We know that The Flash was announced in 2014. And now it's obviously 9 years later, and it's finally been released. So a huge amount of time. We know all the drama with Ezra Miller. We know all the drama about DC. Finally, this came out, right?
Yeah. So to give everyone perspective, let's say a decade in the making.
That's right.
5 directors.
I've heard 45 writers. I
wouldn't be surprised. A very troubled lead actor. And then on top of that, change in studio in studio leadership. Yeah.
And despite all of that, it came out. It was heavily hyped. First of all, it was a little bit surprising. Maybe it wasn't scrapped, but it was heavily hyped, partially because based on what we know about the new DC universe, subject to change, not really any sequel potential to this, right? It's kind of a one and done. And all the characters are done and dusted.
Say that.
I say that. Maybe not.
I don't trust anyone at DC on a commercial basis. So James Gunn, I trust critically. But yeah. I think that if this movie makes the money that I think this movie is going to make, I suspect they're going to force James Gunn to put The Flash in the quote-unquote Elseworlds category and make a sequel.
Yeah. So The Flash, just to kind of go back in the history of The Flash, there's a television series The Flash. Is that still ongoing?
I think this is the last season.
It's been for like 7 seasons, right?
Yeah, something. It started off incredibly well. Grant Gustin plays the current Barry Allen on TV. I thought he did a really good job. I was actually quite annoyed / irritated that they didn't want to consider him for the movie version of The Flash.
Yeah.
I didn't have a problem with Ezra Miller back in the day.
Yeah.
I thought that Grant Gustin did a really good job on the TV show, and I thought he really embodied a lot of what made The Flash a really good character. And I think, when we were kids, we always played that game, like, if you could be any superhero, who would you be? The Flash was my guy.
No way.
More than anyone else.
No, I never knew this about you.
In the DC universe, The Flash was my guy. In the MCU, Captain America was my guy. Not Spider-Man, not Wolverine, not any of the quote-unquote A-list superheroes. And even in the Justice League, like, The Flash is at best a B-list character at best.
Yeah.
But they were still the guys that I would rather have been.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit more of an emotional thing writing into this.
So we saw the Ezra Miller Flash. He first appeared in Superman versus Batman, Dawn of Justice. He had
cameo.
Kind of a small role, and then he had a larger role in Justice League. And then he got his own standalone feature, finally coming out in 2023. So that's a background to all of this in terms of production background, in terms of Ezra Miller legal drama background. But the trailer, I thought, looked fantastic.
Superb.
Fantastic trailer.
Yeah.
And the fact that it didn't get canceled, I think, when Gunn took over, he had the opportunity to kind of look at it and trash it, right? And I think that, to me, the implication was, if he was willing to release this, knowing the troubles of Ezra Miller, knowing that he's going to replace Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman, what that told me was that he watched it and he's like, this is a pretty good film. This one can make money. Let's at least release this one. Right?
So you've raised a good point. Let's talk about a couple of things. One, we are going to do our level best, although I am almost quite positive I will fail at this, at separating the art from the artist.
I can do that.
I will do my best, and I will criticize this movie on the basis of the movie and not on Ezra Miller.
Okay.
But for a vast majority of the audience, I don't have that expectation that they're capable of doing that or willing to do that. And that's fair enough, because even I am not willing to do that. So I think it's important as a review to try to be as objective as possible about it. But the frank reality is, and look, I think I've been very clear on this issue, I am not a fan of cancel culture. However, I am a huge fan of consequence culture. And as far as I can tell, there have been no consequences of value to what Ezra Miller has done. And what they have done is some pretty horrendous stuff. And I'm not excusing that. So whether there are moments in this movie that are excellent or not, neither of us are justifying their behavior off screen. That is for the judge and the courts to determine. If we like this movie, if we dislike this movie, it's not a tacit, let's say, support of Ezra Miller. It's just of the movie.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I think that's really important.
Yeah, I've been able to maybe disassociate it a little bit more than it sounds like you have, but I looked at this just kind of as a standalone film. And on that basis, I went and I, like, throughout the movie, was like taking notes, and I was enjoying the entire movie. Like, I found it very, very enjoyable. When I walked out, I was like smiling and really enthusiastic about it. And to be honest, I think it stood up so well that if someone said, do you want to go see it again? I would see it again.
Okay.
I don't know if I would ask someone if they want to see it again, but I would definitely go see it again. Whereas like Transformers, if that's the litmus test, if someone said, hey, I haven't seen Transformers, I know you've seen it, Ethan, you want to see it again? I'd be like, no. I found it very enjoyable. You, I think, are less enthusiastic and a little bit lukewarm on this film, right?
Yeah.
Tell me why. From the beginning, like, how did it start for you? Like, I thought the opening was a quite strong opening. Let's get into it.
Do I think this movie could have been canceled by James Gunn? Certainly. However, I'm also cognizant of the fact that this movie cost $220+ million. That's the official budget.
Whoa.
This movie has been in development and quote unquote production for the last 10 years. I think that number is probably low. I think that number is probably closer to $300 million. And again, I'm willing to bet they spent another $100 to $150 million on prints and advertising, because they have really gone balls to the wall crazy on marketing this movie. Everywhere you go, they've been hyping this movie up, not just online,
That's right.
on TV, on the sides of buses, everywhere. That was part of the hype train. And then, they went so far as to talk about how Tom Cruise loved this movie so much in a private screening that he called up the director privately.
Really?
Yeah. When these kinds of stories come out, whether you believe it or not, you can see the hype happening, right?
Yeah.
When was the last time we heard of any actor calling up a director for a movie that's totally unrelated to that person to say, wow, this was an amazing movie?
Yeah.
And certainly that's not something that you would want to publish, because that's a private one-on-one thing, unless you were going out of your way to say, hey, look, despite all the troubles that we may have with the studio and with the actors, forget about it, because when an action hero like Tom Cruise is calling the director up privately, this is big news.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's talk about the start. I thought a couple of things. One, I thought that the way they've depicted the Flash and his speed in this movie is phenomenal. I was really pleased with that. I loved it. It almost looks like he's ice skating when he's running really fast. He's got a little bit more of a graceful look.
Yeah.
I loved the Speed Force element.
Yeah. I have to say, I took the exact same notes. I'm going to call it posture, but his running style was really, really cool. And it really demonstrated like a different, he wasn't like the Forrest Gump type running form.
Exactly.
Like he had something, as you said, ice skating almost, very graceful. I thought it was super, super cool. Whether Ezra Miller came up with that himself, whether it was a director, whether it was just unintentional, I thought that was super. And the way that they depicted it, cool. Very cool.
The opening sequence is basically a high energy action sequence where Barry is called in by Alfred to come to Gotham City because a hospital is going to collapse. Batman is busy chasing someone, so he needs to help them evacuate the hospital. You get to see that. So on paper, that sounds awesome, because it was a great way to showcase A, that he needs energy constantly. He's always eating, and B, his capabilities. However, I thought the execution was not superb.
The one thing I thought was cool was I thought that they started the movie in a very kind of like whimsical way, right? You see that he's always twitching. He's always trying to move fast. He goes into this thing that kind of looks like a Starbucks. And, it's a continuation even from Dawn of Justice and Justice League, where he's always got to consume a lot of calories.
Yeah.
So you see this, and I thought that interaction with the barista was a very kind of casual, funny way to just kind of like reintroduce us to Ezra Miller. And I think for an audience that was probably a little bit skeptical about Ezra Miller, it was probably a very disarming way to first present him as a guy who's a little bit late for work. You have, this natural kind of funny dialogue with a very slow moving barista. I thought that was cool. And then I thought the other thing that was nice, and I always have this issue with superhero movies, which is, why is the Flash getting the call? And I thought that Alfred explained it pretty well, which is, hold on, can't get a hold of Wonder Woman. Batman's chasing the people that stole this thing. Superman's busy, dealing with this volcano or other disaster. I need you to step up because of that reason. I thought that was a very cool explanation of kind of the practical logistics of how the Justice League would work, which is, hey, you're not my first call, dude, but everyone else has some obligations. I need you to step up.
I think that's one of the few advantages that the DC universe and a defined Justice League have over the MCU.
Yeah.
Because in the MCU, they never really explore the idea that there are other heroes in their individual movies.
Yeah.
There was one offhand comment in Spider-Man 2 Far From Home. Nick Fury is talking to Spider-Man and says, I need you to do this. And he's specifically saying, why don't you call up any of your other heroes?
Right.
I'm on a school trip.
Yeah. And remember Shazam?
Right.
Remember you and I in Shazam were like, where is everybody else?
Yeah.
Shazam, I thought they did a terrible job of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. As a narrative structure, I thought that was very well done. As a justification, very well done.
Yeah.
But if you look at the execution, what did you think of the CGI? And I think this is not just a comment on the first action sequence, but throughout the movie. What was your feeling on the CGI?
I thought the first scene where the hospital wing collapses and Barry has to go through that, I like that scene. As you know, and listeners know, I'm usually very negative about over CGI. And usually it's because I think CGI goes too fast and you're not able to really appreciate things. And it's just trying to like throw a bunch of stuff in your face and hope that you're impressed by the velocity. I thought the slow-mo aspect, and it was a little bit kind of silly with the babies and everything, but I thought the slow-mo aspect was something unique. And I really enjoyed kind of watching the granularity of how he does these things step by step by step. It wasn't super like funny to me, but I have to say, like, as far as CGI goes, I thought that was a unique take on it, something that I haven't seen before. So I had to say, like, I was okay with it. I thought it was a decent scene.
So for a movie that's been in production for a very long time, I don't understand how some of the CGI looked phenomenal. So like when you see Barry running in a straight line and you see the electricity form around him and he goes into the bubble and he starts really breaking the sound barrier. Yeah. I thought all of that stuff looked excellent. The babies looked like rubber babies that you got from like the 80s for your child.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Super fake one. Yeah. And not just the babies. So there was that action sequence where eventually Barry saves the day at the hospital and he goes to help Batman. And you see Batman go off on this action sequence on his own where he's literally surfing behind a car. Yeah. And when you see the explosions and you see Batman come out of that explosive fireball, that looked horrible, I thought. The arena where he gets into the Speed Force and starts to be able to see the multiversal aspect, I thought that looked awful. I thought that looked Scorpion King in the 2000s bad. Like the CGI looked really horrendous. Like, I'm not a graphics animator, but that's the kind of stuff that I would come up with at home on a crappy laptop. It just looked horrendous. I thought it was such a shocking thing to see some things look so good and some things look so bad. It didn't make sense to me how that happened.
I have to say, I probably agree with you in terms of I didn't really like Batman hanging onto the grappling hook and bouncing all over the place. The arena generally was definitely not my favorite part. I don't know if it was because of the CGI, which definitely wasn't remarkable. But I think that entire structure wasn't my favorite part of things. I'm kind of with you on that.
And we'll come back to this towards the end of this review when we start talking about that last sequence and that last scene in there.
I agree.
It gets even worse.
That needs to be discussed. I agree.
That was the issue I had with the CGI. And then going back to a point you made, which is actually a really important point. So the tone of the movie, generally speaking, is relatively serious, right? He's going back in time because he wants to save his mom. He wants to save his family. And, in doing so, he's learning that he's upset the balance of the universe, blah, blah, blah. All that is fine. So tonally, relatively comic booky, but also relatively serious.
Yeah.
So that first sequence where he's saving the babies at the hospital, and literally he's got a gurney and he's picking the babies and plucking them out of the air. He's put one into a microwave, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It just seemed too comical and not in a comic book way. It also seemed a bit slapstick. And instantly I was reminded of, so did you ever watch the Naked Gun movies?
Indeed, I did.
So they did a parody in one of the movies. I think it was the first one, maybe the second one. And they did a parody of that sequence from The Untouchables.
This scene where he's saving the babies, it reminded me of an X-Men movie.
Quicksilver.
Yeah, Quicksilver. Right? He runs in and he wraps everyone in a blanket and throws them out. And
so they did it twice. Remember, they did it once when they're breaking Magneto out of the jail and he's running around the kitchen and he's pushing bullets with his finger. And then in the second movie, you see him go into the mansion as it's exploding. And he does exactly what you're saying.
Yes, correct.
So it's exactly that same sequence, except instead of, adults, it was babies.
Right.
Right. And in this case, the reason I brought up the Naked Gun movie was because it's exactly the same thing we saw in the Naked Gun sequence where they were parodying The Untouchables, where you see the baby's pram fall down the steps at a train station. Kevin Costner saves the day at the last second with Andy Garcia. Okay. Whereas in the Naked Gun movies, you see Leslie Nielsen shooting bullets and you see O.J. Simpson catching babies. And it's not just one, but it's 14 babies that he's just catching as they're all coming down. This reminded me exactly of that.
Oh.
So I don't know. I just thought that tonally, it didn't seem to fit with what they were trying to do with the rest of this movie. If you're going to go slapstick and be comedic, be slapstick and be comedic. And I think that also works a little bit better when it's a couple of different characters, not just the Flash. So you can have that slapsticky moment in the Guardians movie where Peter is being serious and Drax is the guy who's being an idiot. You can have an interplay against each other. But in this movie where it was just the Flash, it becomes a little bit more, I don't know, tonally inappropriate.
I have to say, I take your point. I absolutely see it. I didn't mind the scene personally. In fact, I kind of enjoyed it, but I definitely see how if I was a director and you as an audience member brought that up, I would say, yeah, you're probably right. I may have some emotional attachment to the scene, but you're right. Let's come up with a better way than the babies in the air.
But what did make it work was that it was an excellent showcase of his abilities.
Yeah.
Look, I'm nitpicking, but ultimately I think that's maybe more important, at least as the first set piece of the movie, is for the people who haven't seen The Flash in all those movies previously, and we really haven't seen much of him on his own.
Yeah.
I think this is really important to highlight what he's capable of doing.
Yeah.
The problem with The Flash in the previous movies is that they made Superman equally fast, which is not true.
Right.
And when you do that, you really diminish the value of having Flash on the team when you've got some guy who's equally fast or faster.
You're right.
So I think that A, it's good that we didn't see Superman in this movie. Mm-hmm. And B, this is probably a better way of showcasing that, hey, you think Superman's fast? I'm way faster.
Yeah, you're right.
That was the CGI element, which again, we'll come back to.
Yeah.
Shall we talk about him going in the past and meeting you-know-who?
So the past issue, the fact that he can run so fast that he goes back in time, I think doesn't make any sense. And I guess this is just kind of like a superhero
conceit. Yeah.
Yeah, you just have to say, let's just agree it's possible. It doesn't make sense in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of other superhero movies where getting into a multiverse is explained to the extent that it's practical. A little bit more practically, I find this one to be totally not practical. Although there is, if you remember the original Supermans with Christopher Reeves.
Yeah, where he flies around the world backwards.
Yeah, after Lois Lane dies, he flies around the world backwards and turns back time.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of DC precedent for this. For me, like, I agree it didn't make sense. But then I thought it was interesting that he went back in time, right? And I understand that. He was really, really angry and he went back in time and he said, wait a second, I understand that I've gotten to kind of like this intersection that I can now go back in the past. He doesn't do it. He comes back, talks to Bruce Wayne about it, which I thought was a kind of an interesting way to do it, saying, hey, I think I can do this. Like, what do you think about it? And Bruce is like, do not do it, right?
Yeah.
He does it anyway. He goes back, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought that was a relatively kind of funny scene where he sees his 18-year-old self. I know he's playing himself, but like those two characters, I thought had a very playful vibe and also a very realistic vibe.
Yeah.
Like, it was not unusual to put yourself in both of their shoes. One's an 18-year-old kind of screw up, goof off. The other is more mature, who's seen a lot of stuff. And now he's actually a little bit jealous of his other self, who's got powers that he no longer has, right? So I thought that was a very complicated, nuanced relationship for an actor to portray. And I thought he nailed kind of both of those roles.
Totally. This is one of the areas where I think the movie excelled because there's a lot. It's not just a couple of scenes. It's like 80% of the movie where they both share the same screen together, facing off with each other, interacting with each other.
Yeah.
That's not easy to pull off, technically speaking. Again, I don't know how they do it, but at no point did I look at any of those scenes and think, wow, that is fake. So I was quite impressed with the fact that they were able to pull off a vast majority of this movie where you have the same character in the same scene twice, same actor rather.
I can't remember what the movie I saw just recently on Streamer Skip was, or the show that I saw Streamer Skip with the identical twin sisters, right?
Dead Ringers.
Dead Ringers, right? So having seen this with Rachel Weisz, where she plays two different characters who are identical twin sisters, she definitely gives each character their own personality, but there's not as much interaction between those characters. Right. It's just dialogue. She just has to get in the mindset, this is a more outgoing character, this is a more conservative character. The Barry Allen characters are actually interacting with each other, and the way that he has to really express those lines, I think, is very hard when you don't actually have someone standing opposite from you. So I'm not sure if they did it with a green screen. I'm sure they had someone else reading it, but I felt, as you mentioned, visually, I was convinced. The way that his voice was, the acting, I was totally convinced that he was interacting with his younger or alter ego self, right? And I thought that was so nuanced and so good. I really bought it. And I really felt like I was watching, when we talk about like chemistry, and we've talked about this in Transformers, no chemistry. We've talked about so many other movies, no chemistry. In this, Barry Allen has great chemistry with Barry Allen. You almost felt like it was Rock and Kevin Hart, you know, the way that they were kind of bantering back and forth, right? It was super good.
My favorite sequence was probably that emotional sequence where they're in the Batcave. Older Barry is yelling at younger Barry for using his teddy bear as a dartboard. I thought that was so incredibly nuanced because not only are they fighting with each other, but then the emotional aspect of doing that. Again, this is where it's important to separate the art from the artist. This was really good. It was really well done. And for all the issues I have with Ezra Miller, I have to say they did a phenomenal job with the emotional aspects of this movie, because there are some, that ending sequence where he goes to the grocery store with his mother. I thought that was so good. I thought that
totally agree.
It's rare for me to be emotional in the cinema, But if there was going to be a moment for me to be emotional, it was that sequence where Barry Allen meets his mother as an adult and where he understands what he's about to do is about to condemn her to death. I thought that was absolutely fabulous.
Yeah. There's a lot of movies you and I have seen, and it's always because the daughter or the family or the something, and you kind of feel like, are the stakes really high enough? You know, like you kind of feel like, yes, you know, you're trying to go through a divorce and you don't want to lose your daughter. And like we've seen this in so many movies. It's always a trope, right?
Yeah.
In this movie, I felt like the stakes were right. He's like, hey, my mom died. That's a weird thing, how she died anyway, but go with it. My dad's in jail. He can't get out. Like going to the past, the stakes seemed right. You know, everything that he was going through, to be honest, the stakes seemed right. And as you said, in the end, when he has to make the choice, like you really feel like that's a hard decision to make. Like the emotional tone and the gravity of that moment, I thought absolutely were captured. So let's talk about Michael Keaton.
Yeah, let's do Batman.
Batman is back.
What is your opinion? How did you like the way they handled Michael Keaton? How did you think they handled Ben Affleck? And spoiler alert, how did you like that last twist with Clooney?
So first of all, I thought Affleck played a very good Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
As Pete always points out, Bruce Wayne and Batman are two different people. We've seen that most recently with Robert Pattinson. Affleck is a great, great Batman. And even if you go back to Dawn of Justice, Barry Allen, which I watched in preparation for this movie, Barry Allen goes to Batman and says, hey, what's your special power? And Affleck says, I'm rich, right?
Yeah.
And he plays a very good Bruce Wayne. So I thought he did a great Bruce Wayne. And then I like the idea that Barry's like, look, I'm in the past. Let's go to Wayne Manor and let's go find Bruce. He'll help me fix this, right?
Yeah.
And before we even get there, I thought it was super funny if you even talk about like the references to Back to the Future, right? When they talk about
the Eric Stoltz thing made me laugh so hard.
That was so good, right?
It was so funny for two reasons. One, because it's genuinely hilarious.
It's true. Yes.
And two, I imagine 50 to 70% of the current audience is not going to understand that joke. So it was like a joke made just for you and me.
Yes. And then they're like, Michael J. Fox, you mean the guy that's in Footloose? They're like, no, that's Kevin Bacon. That was Marvel level humor.
100%. That was the closest we've seen DC nail humor on an offbeat moment, which is exactly what DC should be doing, is adding these humorous moments that are in between beats.
Yes.
100%.
Remember, there's that weird guy on the sofa who's like, if he wasn't in Back to the Future, then why do I have this tattoo?
Yeah.
And he goes, that's upside down. He goes, is it? And he puts this, like, all that stuff that's what makes, I think, the movie enjoyable. Say what we will about the CGI. We have legitimate complaints there. But that type of, like, banter, that Eric Stoltz reference, the Footloose reference, the Michael J. Fox,
the Top Gun reference, Bacon, so good.
The Top Gun reference, right? Like, all of that, I thought was exceptional. It was so good, right? Aquaman doesn't exist. Wonder Woman is like this show performer in Vegas, right? They finally find Bruce Wayne. They go to the Bruce Wayne mansion, and there is Michael Keaton, right? Yeah. Wearing one flip-flop, you know, kind of in the kitchen cooking. It wasn't what I expected to see. I didn't expect him to look like that, but I thought it was okay. And then the best part, I thought, was when he was making the pasta and he did the visual explanation of how time is not linear. That's a very good take when there's no absence of multiverses. I thought that's a very good take to visually explain, hey, it's not that simple.
Adding to that, I don't know if I like this explanation, but what I liked is, they were very simply able to showcase how the DC's idea of a multiverse differs from
Right.
every other idea of a multiverse we've ever seen.
Right.
One, I like that a lot.
Mhm.
Two, I like that it was different. I like that it was something unique and a different take on it. And if you think about it, in the last 2 years, this is the 5th movie we've seen with a multiverse.
Yeah.
We saw Far From Home Spider-Man.
Yeah.
We saw Doctor Strange.
Yes.
We saw Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yep.
We saw Spider-Man Miles Morales. It's not that I'm getting tired of it, not at all. In fact, I think there's still a lot you can mine from this idea of a multiverse. Yeah. It's just that this was slightly different in the sense that, so the DCEU's explanation, and whether this applies to the DCU or not is to be determined, but at least in Zack Snyder's DCEU, the idea and the concept is that when you go back in time and change something, you are basically creating what they called a fulcrum point. And it doesn't just change the future from that point, but it changes the past from that point because the time stream pivots around that fulcrum. If they had just said it, I don't think I would have gotten it immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact that you see Bruce Wayne explain that with 2 strands of pasta was so simple and so brilliant. What I really enjoyed was the fact that it was Bruce Wayne saying this because he's the smart guy and he's always been if you remember Michael Keaton Batman, we're talking 30 years ago now, he was the guy who was always the tech genius, the detective first and Batman second. I think a lot of the other Batman have kind of shifted away from that over time. We saw a little bit of that with Christian Bale when he was trying to figure out the bullet from the Joker in The Dark Knight. You see a lot more of that with Pattinson, but again, they diminished him because they had Alfred solve the puzzles and not Robert Pattinson. So I like that they're kind of going back to the roots to say that, hey, look, Batman was called the world's greatest detective for a reason. Let him be the one who's the genius that explains to you what actually happens.
So I agree with you. I thought the way that they explained it, I thought was great.
Yeah.
The idea is innovative. And the fact that they did it while he was making the pasta, and because the whole thing kind of revolves around his mother forgetting the tomato sauce, right? Kind of also comes back at the end because they say like, hey, the tomato sauce moved up on the shelf and the pasta cooked different, or the pasta cooked early. All that comes together. And then I thought there was another funny part where he was putting like the Parmesan on there, and Young Barry's like, what's the Parmesan? He goes, the metaphor has ended. It's just a condiment, like.
We'll talk about the bigger picture of this time travel in a bit, or the multiverse in a bit. I gotta say, I was somewhat, I don't want to say annoyed or disappointed, but I was slightly let down by Michael Keaton's Batman. And not because Michael Keaton isn't awesome. No, in fact, his Batman was awesome, but I think it just seemed to be a little bit of a wasted character. And that was kind of brought in. He says 2 lines which came back directly from the 89 film, right?
Yes.
He says, you want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Let's get nuts.
And then when you first see him in the Batsuit, he says, I'm Batman. Look, half of me cheered in my mind, right? My heart was soaring because I love Michael Keaton's Batman. It was wonderful to see that.
Yeah.
But the cynic inside me was just like, man, this is a lot of nostalgia bait. Like you see the younger Barry Allen unveil the Batmobile and you're just like, oh my God, it's the Batmobile.
Yeah.
But then nothing comes of it. We never get to see it again. So why bother? Like, I think it would have been better if they just unveiled, like, for example, one of the tips of the Batwing. And he's like, what the hell is this? And then later you see the plane. You're just like, oh, shit, that's awesome. Why show the car if you're not going to use it? I thought that was a little bit annoying.
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
I think what they were trying to do was say, hey, we've got Michael Keaton back. Let's ramp up the nostalgia bait. And I think that this is well more important towards that end sequence where you start to see all the different multiverses start colliding and crashing.
Yeah.
And you see, first of all, we might as well talk about it now because it was actually, for me, one of the most annoying parts of this movie. So, towards the end of this movie, Barry learns that, or I think it finally sinks into him what Bruce was trying to explain to him at the beginning of the movie, is that it's not just about the butterfly effect. It's that you don't know what you're actually going to be changing, and you could end up destroying a lot of things that shouldn't be destroyed.
Right.
And so when he's in the Speed Force, and when we see him in that time arena, which again looks like garbage, but look even more like garbage when he's in that last sequence, you get to see all of the different Spider-Man. Sorry, that was a Freudian slip of Freudian slip, because this is exactly what they were trying to do. All of the different Supermen. You get to see all of the Batman. And that Nicolas Cage thing, by the way, I mean, that was a joke 20, 30 years in the making, a Kevin Smith joke.
Yeah.
From 30 years ago. I thought that landed well for me, but that's kind of like an inside joke in the sense that most people won't understand why is Nicolas Cage playing Superman and fighting a giant spider. No one's going to understand that except for the people who are true Kevin Smith fans and who understand who John Peters is. But that sequence really upset me because we see Christopher Reeves as the original Superman.
The real original guy, right? The black and white.
So that's George Reeves.
Yeah. We didn't see Adam West, I don't think.
We saw Adam West.
Oh, we did. Okay.
But it was just a blink and you miss it. You saw the original Supergirl from 84.
We didn't see Dean Cain, did we?
No, we didn't see Dean Cain, which is, I'm going to get into that. So we see Helen Slater, and the CGI was god awful. And it made me think of Grand Moff Tarkin and Princess Leia in Rogue One 7 years ago. And that CGI was like infinitely superior to what we saw in a 2023 movie with a budget that's twice as much. It didn't make sense to me.
Can I say, for this scene in the arena, I liked the idea. And for the Superman and for the Batman, I think it's easy to pull off, much more than Spider-Man, because there's only 3 Spider-Men, right? And there's so many Batman and so many Superman. I thought that idea was super, super, super. I thought the execution was, like, I was excited to see them, but I do recognize, like, the execution of that definitely could have been improved. But I thought the idea was amazing, I have to say.
So again, on paper, the idea was phenomenal. It was very much like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in the sense that you get to see, you get to understand, and you get to use this movie as a way to bring in and explain away all the different DC movies. But why didn't we see Dean Cain? Why didn't we see whatever. Why didn't we see any of the TV Superman? Why didn't we see any of the other TV Batman? Why didn't we see anyone else? Like, I understand that you couldn't have Val Kilmer come back, right? Because he's ill. It wouldn't have been okay. But why couldn't we have seen a CGI Val Kilmer as Batman? Why couldn't we have seen the original Wonder Woman? There's so many different things that we could have seen. If you're going for it, then go whole hog. And you're absolutely right. Spider-Man, there were only 3, so it was kind of easier to do that. I get it. They really lost an opportunity there. That's one. The 2, again, this is the cynic in me. This was all nostalgia bait. This was all trying to make me feel good. But by the end of this movie, I was just kind of annoyed by that because they didn't take care of how it looked. And it just looked awful. Like, this looked like Nintendo 64 graphics from 2001. It just looked really bad.
Yeah, I agree that the idea was good. The execution was miserable. But the other part that I really did not understand, and again, as a moviegoer, I glossed over it, but as a critic, I can't. I don't really understand who this purple dude was. Like, that whole part I don't understand. I can't explain it. Can you? That seemed to be him trapped going through the cycle, right?
So that purple dude was an older Barry Allen. So we get to see 3 Barry Allens. We see original Barry Allen, young Barry Allen, and old man Barry Allen. And Old Man Barry Allen is covered like in all these like blades and rocks and things like that, which not really well explained, but then you kind of understand when you start to see the younger Barry Allen get stabbed with the knife, Zod's weapon.
Right. I have to say, I kind of like the idea that Zod was back. I thought that those scenes were actually not so bad. I agree that they kind of minimized Batman in there, and I wish they had not. But those fight scenes, I think, were not so bad. And I think that it was more palatable to me. Every other fight scene kind of seems like the good guys are on their heels. They're ready to get decimated. And then something comes out of nowhere and they're able to turn it around and they're able to win, right? Yeah. And I thought this scene was better because it shows they really lost. They lost again and again and again. And I thought that reminded me a little bit about like that movie with Tom Cruise, like Edge of Tomorrow, where you see the same result. And I wasn't getting bored of it because it kept going back to the arena and saying, let's try it like this. Let's try it like this. Let's try it like this. That scene I thought was much more enjoyable to me than all the other long third act fight scenes I've seen in Transformers, that I've seen in Guardians, that I've seen in Ant-Man, that I've seen in name the movie. They're all the same. I thought this one was unique, and that's why it was more palatable to me. Even in like Avatar, they're all third act, very long fight scenes. The good guys on their heels, they come back, blah-de-blah-de-blah. You know they're not going to lose. I thought this one was better. The arena stuff, though, with the old Barry, kind of confused me, and I agree it would have been better to come up with an alternative to this.
I don't think they needed an old Barry, because in that last battle sequence, first of all, I really like that you get to see Flash's powers used in different ways. Like when he creates the little cyclone, when he does the super punch, all those things, very good, straight out of the comics. Loved it. What I think would have been better, and what they kind of implied, was that after that explanation of fulcrum points, what I think would have been a better way of doing that is for Barry, because Batman understands that this is a fulcrum point, because he says, this is where I die.
Right.
You can't save me this time.
That's right.
And we see no matter what they do, Batman dies, Supergirl dies. So if he had explained or taken the time out while younger Barry is literally running up a storm everywhere else, if you see in the middle of that battle sequence where you see Michael Keaton grab Ezra Miller and tell him, listen, this is the fulcrum point. I die here. Supergirl dies here. And if you don't want this to happen, you have to go back in time and stop yourself from changing your past.
Yeah.
And then you have like a mini tussle between younger Barry and older Barry.
Right.
I think that would have been far better than what they did here. I just thought that, this pseudo battle between an even older Barry inside this fake ass looking arena, I thought was just awful. I didn't like it.
Yeah. I agreed. Something was missing there. The way that you described it is good, because then you can have the older Barry do the same emotional scene with his mom. Yeah. And you can have the younger Barry who's going to continue, but now with powers, be kind of like a bad guy, knowing like it's because of, it's complicated to say, but it's because of me that my mom died. I'm out to get this guy, know? And then you see that guy, that would have been like also a natural point for like a sequel if you wanted it.
Exactly. He persists as the villain from now on.
Yeah. I think there's one other thing I wanted to say was the way that original Barry got his powers back, I thought was extraordinarily uncompelling. I like how he lost his powers. The way that he got them back, I'm really unhappy with. I thought that was to talk about Back to the Future again. Like, I thought that was very lame. Like, okay, we're just going to like hit him with a bunch of electricity again. Either Batman should have come up with something, or I'm not able to come up with something, but I really wanted there to be a difference to how he got it. I thought that was very anticlimactic. Although I do thought it was a little bit funny, the way the new Barry kind of like created his own suit. You know, you see him kind of like shaving off the ears of the bat cowl.
Yeah.
You know, like that was kind of clever and funny and seemed more realistic of how things would work. You know, I wish there was an alternate for how he got his powers back. I'm sure you and I could brainstorm on it. I don't have an immediate idea, but I was unhappy with just the lightning strike.
So for me, that was less of a problem because that's straight out of the comic books.
It is?
Yeah, in the Flashpoint, he loses his powers and Bruce helps him get his powers back by replicating what happens in the lab. So for me, that was fine, but I totally hear your point and I totally agree with you. It seemed anticlimactic also because the Supergirl thing, I mean, we haven't really talked about that.
We have to.
The Supergirl thing was, I think, half-baked.
So let's go through this kind of chronologically. Old Barry, or original Barry, believes that there is a Superman somewhere. They identify where he may have been captured and being imprisoned. Turns out to be Siberia. Not clear why the Russians captured him or her, but anyway, they go there. To be honest, I didn't think it was like an amazing scene. I do note that they went in the middle of the night and then they came out in the morning, but I guess they had to come out in the morning for the sunshine. But in any case, I didn't think that scene was particularly great. I thought the big ball dropping was kind of cool. And I thought the idea that they found a lady instead of who they believed would be Superman, I thought was a good twist and a good way to introduce Supergirl.
But that's a twist they should have not had in the trailers all this time. I think that would have blown me away if it was Supergirl not revealed in the trailers.
You're right. But I thought that when they came out, so first of all, I was a little bit surprised because this didn't seem like a very heavily armed group at this Siberian prison. So I thought it was a little bit surprising how much trouble they had getting her out. And then I thought it was very surprising that she came out, and I thought that her, whether it was the speed that they filmed it or just the way that she was kind of fighting, I found her to be like extraordinarily stiff. Like I didn't see her, she had like a lot of clenched fists and like just like kind of like the superhero pose. I just didn't really love that. And then she went very fast and she was like punching people all over the place. And then she like ran out of energy again. I found that to be like, I would have redone that a different way. But then I noticed like after she came back and they kind of revived her a second time after she fought everybody, then I kind of found like her attitude to be the right attitude, which is, hey, I came back from my cousin, Kal-El. I'm not here to save humans. Like you guys abducted me. I found that her overall attitude was probably the right attitude someone would have.
Totally. But then this is where I think something was missing or something. And who knows what it was.
Yeah.
She then goes off and flies towards Zod. She sees Zod fight and kill all these U.S. Army guys.
Yeah.
He sees her.
Yeah.
And then she goes back to the Bat Mansion and then says, okay, I'll help you. Why? Because the point that you raised is exactly right. Right now, there's no reason for her to believe that humanity is good because the moment she got to this place, she's been basically kidnapped.
Correct.
So why all of a sudden does she decide, hey, I just saw Zod kill a bunch of your innocent people. Okay, I'll help. Sorry, that's not enough. Like the whole point of Superman was he understood the inherent goodness in humanity because he was born and brought up, or not born, but he was brought up in Kansas, right? He understands that, hey, people aren't bad. And my father taught me that. And he says that some of them are bad, but Kevin Costner, my dad, explains to me that no matter what, humanity always hopes for the best. There's no ramp up for her for that. So why all of a sudden does she come back to help Barry?
I agree.
It didn't make sense to me. That was first. The second thing is Zod saw her.
Yeah.
Like we see him zoom in and see her.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
What? So he doesn't chase after her? What? Like, why is there a battle scene still going out in the middle of the desert? It should have been at the Batcave.
Can I take this moment to bring up something as well? The suit that she wears has legs. We've never seen a Supergirl that had legs before.
Yeah.
It always is a skirt. What did you think of that, though? Like, all the Supergirls have a skirt and they've got boots. Wonder Woman has a skirt and boots. This one has not even like if you even look at Superman, Superman has blue tights and red boots. Here, she didn't even have red boots. She just had kind of like the blue booties. It was a onesie. I thought of all the outfits, and I thought the costumes were superb. I thought the Flash's new costume was exceptional. Batman wore the original cowl that he wore in '89. I thought it was great. But I thought that Supergirl's outfit was strange to me to see it with the blue booties.
I thought it was fine. I didn't have any comments about it because, again, so here's, I think, the major problem I have. This is the second major problem I have, but I find myself having a hard time caring because the DCEU ends with Aquaman.
But Supergirl gets her own movie, right?
Yeah, but it's not going to be this Supergirl.
Is it true? Because when I look on IMDb, it says Supergirl in development.
With Sasha Calle?
Yes. I think it is her, but I think it's in a different universe.
Maybe.
I think she's in the others.
Well, fine. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. This is, again, this is my problem I've had with DCU after James Gunn started talking. He's gone out of his way to kind of muddy the waters, I think, instead of just keeping quiet and then releasing information once it's confirmed. I think it's a bit silly and nonsensical for them to use Sasha Calle. Not because I think she was bad, but I think because it's just going to add to the confusion of, is the DCEU actually dead or not? We don't know. And this comes back to the whole George Clooney reveal at the end, because we see Aquaman in the post-credit scene, and Aquaman still has a movie coming out in December in which maybe we see a Ben Affleck cameo. Maybe we don't know. I doubt we'll see a George Clooney cameo in there as Batman. I don't think they're going to bother keeping up the continuity. That's what I mean. Is I couldn't care less because it's just so muddled. It's the end. The way DC is treating this is, we're at the finish line. This experiment was more or less a flop. Let's just throw everything at the screen and see what sticks, and we'll let James Gunn pick up the pieces later. That was the second major problem I have with this movie. The first major problem actually is just about this movie, not on the big picture, is that this movie sets up a lot of things but doesn't deliver on them. The Supergirl and Zod thing, again, I get that you need a big third act battle sequence, but I think there was very little that was delivered by that, especially if the point of that fight scene was to showcase to Barry that this was a fulcrum point and that no matter what he did, he wasn't going to be able to change it. Okay, I guess. At the very beginning of the movie, we learn that the very first thing that happens to Barry after he gets his powers is that Zod attacks and he tries to save a father and son, and he was only able to save the son. Yeah. Right? And the father gets killed.
Did I see that in any movie, or is that new?
Probably new.
Yeah.
Because they probably retconned it in there. Fine. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. However, in this alternate version, we see the same father and same son in the same attack by Zod. I thought that would have been a great opportunity for young Barry then to go save them, but he doesn't do that, right? And that's what I mean by leaving things unfinished. What I really liked in Far From Home was Andrew Garfield saves Zendaya, and you see him like almost in tears. Yeah. It's because
that's emotional.
He wasn't able to do the same thing for Gwen Stacy in his movie. And so you get to see him complete that character arc and show some growth. Why even bother explaining that I couldn't save the father, I was only able to save the child when Zod first attacked, and then show the same father and son and not do anything about it? It would have been a great moment to showcase for younger Barry, hey, if you're going to do this, fix the mistakes that I couldn't fix.
You're right.
It would have been fantastic to see that, and it would have shown some character growth for younger Barry, which we don't get to see, right? I just thought it was like so many opportunities that are just missed. The Iris West storyline, like you get to see that they're setting up this romance angle with Iris West, but why? She was in that movie for like 10 minutes, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Why bother? I mean, unless you know you're definitely going to make a Flash 2 and you need to plant the seeds for the sequel where he's now in an established relationship with her, fine. But this is in such shaky grounds now. I don't know why you even bother wasting screen time with her. I don't know. This is the kind of thing that infuriates me because what it does is narratively has very little to do with anything. And I think that for a movie as long as this was, you're wasting time on screen. I think you could have easily cut 20 to 30 minutes of this movie out. I really think you could have cut 20 to 30 of this movie out and really focused on Barry Allen, because I really think the best part of this movie was, I can't believe I'm going to say this, Ezra Miller and his story, right? 100%. As Barry Allen.
Yep.
All the other stuff was kind of fluff and maybe not necessary. Again, I loved seeing Michael Keaton's Batman on screen. Yep. It was really fabulous to see him back and to do the things that they physically weren't able to film back in 1989.
Yeah.
Right? So it wasn't just a few cheesy punches. It was full out action sequences that we never saw before. So that was great.
Yeah.
But then you think about it and you're just like, how valuable is 35, 40 minutes of screen time for that on there? Probably not as valuable as I would have much rather seen the interaction between the two Barrys again.
So I think there's two things that made this a very, very tricky film to position. And the first one is, I think a lot of the stuff that we see, like all the cameos and stuff, that may have been, I don't want to say like added back in, but they may have tried to maximize the footage to minimize Ezra Miller. And then say, look, it's not just Ezra Miller, it's Batman #1, Batman #3, Batman number whatever their sequences are, right? And show a lot more characters to kind of minimize Ezra Miller. And I think the second complication is, again, that the movie, just if it's a one-off movie, has a different evaluation than if you consider that kind of publicly it's been identified that this is the end of the road for these characters. Then you look at it differently. And I think navigating between those two things is super tricky. And I know what DC wants. DC wants their cake and they want to eat it too.
Yeah,
that's
exactly right.
They want this movie to make a crap load of money, and they kind of want to be put in a position where it's made so much money. They're like, well, now we've got to make a sequel. They don't actually want it to fail. They don't actually want it to lose money. At the same time, they're like, you know what? If it does lose money and we have to put a hard stop on it, at least it takes this ethical decision about Ezra Miller and all these other practical decisions about Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman. At least it takes them off the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
you're right. You're absolutely right.
They want their cake and they want to eat it too. And I don't blame them. I mean, that's how you run a business. The business of the business is to make money, but at the same time, they don't want to make the hard decisions. So they're like, let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
If it makes money, we know it's going to have another. Somehow they have to make another one. If no one goes to see this, if it loses money, it will be easy for them to justify cutting the franchise, or at least cutting these characters from the franchises.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So as a business guy, that totally makes sense. That's absolutely the right call because you get to hedge on both sides.
Yeah.
And you get to take advantage of either outcome.
Yeah.
But I think as a fan of comic books, as a fan of these characters and of, you know, a fan of the genre, I think it's infuriating because what you're doing is you're sending mixed messages.
Oh, for sure.
And you're ultimately putting yourself in a position where you're theoretically alienating your biggest fan. I, for one, have written the DCEU off how many movies ago, right? Well before Black Adam, well before Shazam, before any of these movies came out, I'd already written it off. if it wasn't for the fact that I really liked The Batman with Robert Pattinson so much, I probably couldn't have cared less. And I think this is where they are going to face some serious problems, because the one thing the MCU got right in the first 2 or 3 phases was they served the fans almost exclusively. And that led to them being able to serve the wider society who's just like, I don't know who Captain America is as a comic book character, but I really like the first few movies. It's funny. It's got great action sequences. I don't know anything about the comic books, but I like the movies.
Mhm.
Whereas this, I think with the DCEU, they tried to do that, but that's no longer the case, where they haven't been able to win over the general audience. That's my general feeling. And they've certainly lost the respect of the specialized fans. My gut still tells me that I don't know how the numbers are doing. I don't know what the tracking is like. I suspect that this movie is going to make a ton of money.
You have no idea if it's on track for like 700 million. It's not going to be a $1 billion movie, I don't think. But do you think it's going to hit 700, 800 million?
I think it has to if it wants to be profitable. I don't know if it's going to. So the screening I saw it at in India was like 50 people deep, so not insignificant.
Yeah.
And people were yelling out during the fight sequences and during the action
Whoa.
sequences. They were loving it.
Wow.
And maybe this is just an India thing. I don't know. But like the enthusiasm levels for these movies, at least anecdotal evidence for me,
Yeah.
through the roof.
That's great.
Really through the roof. So I think that's a good sign. Again, for the cinema industry as a whole, that's a great sign. For this movie in particular, maybe, maybe not. Who knows? I hope this thing makes it, right? Even if that means making a mess for the DCU going forward, which,
Yeah.
I think James Gunn has already done a good job of doing on his own.
Yeah.
I hope it makes money, but I just hope we don't see any more sequels because, if we do, you're going to have to explain why we don't see Ben Affleck's Batman, why we don't see Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, why we don't see Jason Momoa's Aquaman in the future movies.
And we didn't see Cyborg in this at all.
That makes sense because, that guy has kind of burned every bridge possible at Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's ever going to be in another superhero movie, maybe in Marvel, but I think even Disney would be wise to stay away because he really did a lot of damage in the public relations front, and Disney is not one to tolerate that kind of stuff.
No.
So I think he's more or less written himself off, just like how John Boyega has done for any major franchises.
We've gone through the good and the bad, what we like, what we don't like, what could be improved. Where do you fall in terms of your rating of this film?
So, in a lot of ways, the storyline is relatively close to the original Flashpoint comic book series. I think this is as good a Flash movie as I could have expected.
Okay.
Do I think that you need to run out to the cinemas to watch this? No. Do I think you should definitely watch it when you get a chance? Yes. This is a wait for streaming for me.
Ooh.
And again, even if you remove Ezra Miller from the equation, honestly, there's enough problems I have with it in terms of the DCEU and then the DCU now, where I'm just like, look, it's only going to make the scene more of a mess for you in the continuity of the Warner Brothers saga. So just save yourself the headache and the hassle. Watch it on streaming.
I was not expecting that from you prior to this movie coming out.
Oh, neither was I.
And I disagree with you. We've talked about all the warts that the Flash has, and all of those are absolutely true. There could have been some changes to the characters. There could have been some changes to the narrative. Some of the CGI was iffy at best. But overall, really overall, I thought this was a very, very enjoyable movie. And really, at the end of the day, the only thing that kind of matters is the entertainment value of the movie. And I think that when I look at, and again, my comparisons are Ant-Man Quantumanium which was a very well-produced movie that was joyless. I compare this to Guardians of the Galaxy 3 that failed to live up to volumes 1 and 2. I look at this compared to Transformers, which was utterly unenjoyable. The Flash was really a fun movie to watch. It was engaging. It brought in a lot of nostalgia, a lot of characters. It didn't dwell on anything too much. It had at its core a realistic and emotional story, and it was fun and funny at the right times in the right places. I enjoyed the film. I absolutely see the critical issues that people would have with it. Those are super valid. But if I'm just saying, I want to spend 2.5 hours of my life, I want to walk out with a smile on my face, I thought The Flash absolutely achieves that. It is a blockbuster summer superhero film, and I think you should absolutely go see it in cinemas. Sit back, relax, turn your brain off on all the other drama that's happening outside of the screen. Don't think too hard about whether or not these characters are ripe for a reboot or for a sequel. Just enjoy this story for what it is. And by those standards, I have to give this a must subscribe. And I really have to say, in a world that is giving me a bunch of stuff that hasn't made me smile, this movie has really made me smile. I thought it was extremely likable and enjoyable. And that's why I encourage everyone to see it in cinemas now.
Unbelievable. So that is a must-watch in cinemas for The Flash by Ethan. That is a wait for streaming for Pete.
And maybe the first time we've had a strong difference of opinions.
Actually, not that strong. You had a much better opinion of Shazam 2 than I did. But you raised a good point.
Because of the patent.
For 2023,
yeah.
Because of this score, you are actually outpacing me for your scores in the cinema than normal. Like, it's usually the other way around. It's always me who gives everyone the benefit of the doubt and scores better, and you're actually outscoring me.
Wow, that is surprising, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So that is The Flash DCEU's
penultimate film,
Aquaman in December. And then let's see where we go from here.
Yeah. What do you guys think of this movie? Did you find yourselves running as fast as The Flash to the cinema or away from the cinema? Let us know. We want to hear what works for you, what didn't work for you. Did you guys like seeing Ben Affleck? Did you guys like seeing Michael Keaton? We want to hear about it. Oh my God. Did you guys like seeing George Clooney, who's finally back? Let us know. Tweet at us at F&S Podcast. DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast. Email us aloha@filmsandstuffpodcast.com. Or the easiest and the best thing you could do, like this video, leave a comment below, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Any of those things helps us out greatly.
Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Pete. We will see you on the next episode of the Films and Stuff Podcast.
Thanks, Ethan.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.